Hey, how's it going? My name is Mark. I'm a student at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I wanted to present today about the brachial plexus. I found this topic quite intimidating in the beginning when I first learned it, but the more I studied it, the more fascinated I grew by it, and I want to share maybe some helpful ways to remember the brachial plexus and maybe even talk about some clinical scenarios here. Hopefully, this picture here got you interested in the topic, but yeah, it's upper limb innervation. That's what we're going to be talking about. Here's some objectives. I hope to cover some of these in this lecture. If not, well, there's a lot of video tutorials online that can help you learn the brachial plexus deeply. I want to start off with the organization. I think it's organized in a very particular fashion, starting with the roots, all the way to the branches. There's a specific nomenclature for each division, and you can use a mnemonic like the one I have here on the left. I got this from the first aid book. Rugby teams drink cold beer. You just use the first letter of each word to remember the different parts of the brachial plexus. I, however, use the visual mnemonic. So whenever I think of a brachial plexus, I really just thought about a tree with a swing on it. Let me explain. As we can see here, we have a tree, and all we have to think about is going from the bottom to the tree all the way to the top, right? The first part of the brachial plexus are roots, and to no surprise, a tree has roots at the very bottom, right? And then from the roots, you get to the trunk, right? A big meaty part of the tree, and then it divides, okay? And then we're gonna think about the trunk dividing into our divisions of the brachial plexus. And then I think about that swing on the tree, right? You wouldn't want to put the swing at the far edge of the tree because it's just going to land on a branch and the swing is going to fall. So we add it right after divisions. That's where we're going to have our chord. I got this from Spanish. I'm a Spanish speaker. Cordón is string in Spanish, so that's what I use. It sounds like chord to me, so I use that to think about string. But yeah, I mean, you can think about it that way if it helps you, like string, chord, same sort of stuff. And then you move outwards to the tree and finally get your branches. So you got your roots, your trunks, your division, your chords, and then your branches. And that's what I think about whenever I think about the brachial plexus. As you can see here, the objective is to get from this sort of schematic into being able to identify it on a real cadaver. And this is from Blue Link Anatomy. They're doing fantastic work over there, providing these resources at no cost. So I highly recommend you check those out. Of course, a brachial plexus is not going to be color coded like this in real life, but nonetheless, it's a great learning tool. Something I do want to point out is how going from the roots, you get to the trunks, right? The trunks, they're named as upper, middle, lower. You might even see superior, middle, inferior. While the chords here are named based on something else, right? They're lateral, posterior, and medial. And medium. Why is that? Well, it has to do with the axillary artery. These chords are named relative to their position to the axillary artery. So this chord here is posterior to the axillary artery, therefore is called a posterior chord. This one's lateral to it, this one's medial to it. The trunks don't follow that nomenclature, just the chords. Something I want to talk about here because it relates to embryology, and I just find it that it enhances our understanding of the brachial plexus, is talking about divisions. Why do we have an anterior division and a posterior division? Well, it turns out that in embryology, you started out with the dorsal and a ventral muscle mass. Another name for posterior is dorsal. Another name for anterior is ventral. Same thing here. You can think about it anterior muscle mass or posterior muscle mass. Point is, these two muscle masses leads to two different kinds of muscle groups, right, that do different functions in the arm. It's not exactly perfect, but as a rule of thumb, the ventral muscle mass leads to muscles that allow for flexion. That is, between two bones, it kind of shortens the angle between them. very popular example of a well-known flexor in the upper arm is the biceps, right? It's a flexor. It's going to shorten the angle between our upper arm bone, the humerus, as well as the radius and the ulna, which are forearm bones, right? That's a flexor. Well-known example of an extensor in the arm will be the tricep, right? It's going to extend. It's going to lengthen the space between those two bones, right? Extending the arm. Well, it comes from the dorsal muscle mass, right? These muscles that allow for extension, not just in the upper arm, but also in the forearm, allow for this sort of action, right? Let me explain. So, in the forearm, flexion would be thinking about moving these muscles on the palm side of the forearm forward, right? So, if I contract these muscles and I pull down here, I'm gonna get flexion, and that's what it looks like. The muscles that allow for this sort of movement come from, that's right, the ventral muscle mass. If I were to do the opposite, so now I'm going to pull on the backside of the arm here downwards, well, I'm going to get forearm extension. And the muscles that allow for this come from the posterior cord. Pretty neat, right? This is just an overview of what I'm talking about here. So we have flexion, extension, just a quick recap. As we can see here, these divisions are going to allow for different nerves. And I said it wasn't perfect, right? So from the posterior divisions, we have the posterior cord, and that's going to give us the axillary nerve as well as the radial nerve that comes here. The axillary nerve innervates our deltoid here. It's not exactly an extensor, but the radial nerve, right, that we talked about earlier, is going to allow for those extensor movements. It's going to contract the triceps, which we know is going to extend our arm, and it's going to contract the muscles that allow for forearm extension, as I talked about here. It's going to allow for this sort of movement, right? The median nerve is going to innervate these muscles, and as we can see here, the median nerve stems from the anterior division of the brachial plexus. So that's what I mean. There's two divisions, and that's going to allow for two different sorts of movements. All right, let's go ahead and do a clinical scenario, just because it gets us thinking about the brachial plexus critically, and you don't need any background knowledge on the brachial plexus to answer it. It's just another way to apply the knowledge that we just learned. Let's just say you have a patient here, college student, they have weakness on their left wrist. They woke up this morning after studying and they fell asleep on their chair, kind of like this gentleman here on the left. So you tell the student, all right, go ahead and outstretch your arms and go ahead and move your wrist upwards. So in other words, extend both of your wrists. And this is what they have here. This is a clinical sign called wrist drop. So let's think about it for a second. Where is the lesion for this patient? And you can answer this question by a process of elimination. You do not need to know the names of all these nerves. But let's think about it. This is a problem with extension. And what division allows for extension? Is it the ventral or is it the dorsal muscle mass that allows for extension? Well, it's the dorsal, right, which gives you the posterior divisions, the ones in green here, posterior divisions, that end up giving you this nerve C. And that's the radial nerve. The radial nerve allows you to extend your forearms and your triceps and that sort of thing. So that's really where this patient unfortunately got injured. Of course, there's all types of nerves, and you can really dive deeply into this topic if you wish to do so, and I encourage you to do so. But this is just a quick overview of the brachial plexus, another way of thinking about it, and tying it into embryology. I hope you enjoyed or at least found this lecture helpful.